The galaxy knows 7 forms of lightsaber combat. Each represents a different philosophy, a different approach to channeling the Force through a blade of pure energy. Form I taught simplicity. Form 2 embraced elegance. Form 3 prioritized defense. Form VII celebrated acrobatics. Form V demanded power. Form VI sought balance. And then there was Form 7. Form VII was different from all the others. Where the first 6 forms could be learned, practiced, and mastered through discipline and dedication, Form 7 required something else entirely. It demanded that its practitioners walk a path that terrified even the most confident Jedi Masters. It asked them to embrace emotions the Jedi Order had spent millennia teaching their students to suppress. Form 7 was ferocity given form. It was controlled chaos, deliberate unpredictability, and aggression refined into an art. The Jedi who created it understood that sometimes peace could only be achieved through overwhelming force, that sometimes serenity required the capacity for absolute violence. But understanding this truth and living it were 2 entirely different things. The lightsaber forms didn't appear fully formed in a single moment of inspiration. They evolved over millennia as the Jedi Order grew, adapted, and faced new challenges across the galaxy. Each form emerged as an answer to specific needs, specific weaknesses that had been exposed in combat. In the earliest days of the Jedi Order, combat was simple and direct. Form Y, known as Shai Cho, was developed when lightsabers first became the weapon of choice for Force-sensitive warriors. It was basic, relying on broad strikes and simple defensive movements. Every Jedi learned Shicho as younglings because it established the fundamental patterns that all other forms would build upon. As centuries passed and the Jedi encountered more sophisticated opponents, new forms emerged. Form 2, Makashi, was created specifically for lightsaber-to-lightsaber dueling, emphasizing precision and economy of motion. Form 3, Soresu, arose from the need to defend against blaster fire as ranged weapons became more prevalent. Form 4, Ataru, channeled the Force into acrobatic movements that could overwhelm opponents through sheer speed and unpredictability. Each form represented not just a fighting style, but a philosophy about how to engage with conflict itself. Form V split into 2 variants. Xian focused on blast deflection and turning an opponent's attacks against them, while Jem So emphasized powerful counterattacks that could break through any defense. Form 6, Niemann, attempted to balance elements from all the previous forms, creating a moderate approach that served most Jedi well enough for the relatively peaceful times they lived in. But some situations couldn't be resolved with moderation. Some enemies couldn't be defeated with defensive patience or balanced approaches. Some battles required absolute commitment, total aggression, and the willingness to channel emotions that the Jedi Code taught should be released into the Force. This realization led to the development of Form 7. The exact origins of Form 7 remain somewhat shrouded in the mists of Jedi history. Unlike the other forms, whose creation can be traced to specific masters or specific eras, Form 7 emerged gradually from the Jedi Order's ongoing struggle with their own capacity for darkness. What we do know is that Form 7, originally called Juyo, was developed sometime after the first 6 forms had been established. The Jedi who created it recognized a fundamental problem with the existing combat forms. In moments of true crisis, when facing enemies who embraced the dark side without hesitation or restraint, Jedi who relied solely on the traditional forms found themselves at a disadvantage. Sith Lords and dark side warriors fought with passion, with fury, with complete emotional commitment to victory at any cost. They drew strength from their anger, their hatred, their willingness to destroy anything in their path. Against such opponents, the careful discipline of Form 2 could seem inadequate. The defensive patience of Form 3 might not be enough. Even the aggressive power of Form 5 sometimes fell short when confronting an enemy who had surrendered completely to their darkest impulses. The Jedi needed a form that could match that intensity, that could meet darkness with equal ferocity, without requiring the practitioner to actually fall to the dark side. Form 7. Juyo was the answer, but it came with a terrible price. From the moment of its creation, Juyo was controversial within the Jedi Order. The Council recognized its effectiveness, but feared its nature. They understood that any Jedi who truly mastered Form 7 would need to channel emotions and impulses that came dangerously close to the dark side itself. Juyo required its practitioners to fight in a state of controlled fury. It demanded that they tap into their aggression, their passion for victory, their willingness to completely dominate their opponent. The line between channeling these emotions for the light and surrendering to them in service of darkness was razor thin. Many Jedi Council members throughout history argued that Form 7 should be banned entirely. They believed that no amount of combat effectiveness was worth the risk of losing Jedi to the dark side. Others contended that in a galaxy where darkness existed and thrived, the Jedi needed every tool available to combat it, even dangerous ones. The compromise that emerged was strict restriction. Form 7 would be taught, but only to Jedi who had already proven their commitment to the light side beyond any doubt. Only those who had mastered their emotions through the other forms would be permitted to study Juyo. And even then, most Jedi who began learning Form 7 would be discouraged from pursuing it to true mastery. The Jedi Order essentially accepted that Form 7 existed, but treated it as a last resort, a necessary evil that should be avoided whenever possible. This cautious approach had consequences. Because Form 7 was so restricted, relatively few Jedi ever learned it well enough to use it effectively. Those who did often found themselves viewed with suspicion by their peers. Watch carefully for any signs that the foreman was pulling them toward darkness. The philosophy underlying Form 7 was fundamentally different from the other 6 forms, and understanding that philosophy is essential to understanding why the form was so dangerous and so effective in equal measure. Where Form 2 emphasized control and precision, Form 7 embraced chaos. Where Form 3 preached patience, Form 7 demanded immediate and overwhelming aggression. Where Form 6 sought balance and moderation, Form 7 threw itself entirely into each moment of combat, with complete emotional and physical commitment. Juyo was built on the principle that unpredictability itself could be weaponized. If an opponent couldn't anticipate your next move, couldn't read your patterns or predict your responses, they were already at a disadvantage. But achieving true unpredictability required abandoning the careful, measured approach that characterized most Jedi combat training. A Juyo practitioner in battle didn't follow predetermined sequences or rely on muscle memory to guide their movements. Instead, they allowed each moment to flow into the next organically, responding to their opponent with instinct rather than deliberate thought. They struck from unexpected angles, mixed powerful blows with subtle feints, alternated between aggressive advances and sudden retreats with no discernible pattern. This approach placed enormous demands on the practitioner. They had to maintain absolute focus while simultaneously releasing conscious control over their actions. They had to be simultaneously aware and instinctive, planned and spontaneous, controlled and wild. The emotional component of Form 7 was what made it truly dangerous for Jedi to practice. The other forms could be executed effectively, while maintaining the serene emotional state the Jedi Code encouraged. A master of Form 3 could deflect blaster bolts for hours while maintaining perfect mental calm. A Form 2 duelist could engage in extended lightsaber combat while experiencing nothing but focused concentration. Form Sekhvim didn't work that way. To fight effectively using Juyo, a practitioner needed to access their aggressive impulses, their desire to win, their willingness to dominate their opponent completely. They had to tap into emotions that the Jedi spent their entire lives learning to release into the Force. Anger at injustice could fuel their strikes. Passion for protecting the innocent could drive their offensive. The fierce joy of combat itself could sharpen their instincts. These weren't dark side emotions in themselves. Jedi could feel anger at evil, passion for justice, satisfaction in victory over darkness. The danger lay in how easily those emotions could transform into something darker. Anger at injustice could become personal hatred for the one committing that injustice. Passion for protecting others could become possessive attachment. Joy in combat could become bloodlust, a desire to inflict pain for its own sake. The line between righteous fury and simple rage was almost invisible in the heat of battle. This was why Form 7 was so restricted. The very qualities that made it effective against dark side opponents were the same qualities that could corrupt a Jedi who wasn't absolutely certain of their own moral foundation. The physical techniques of Form 7 reflected its chaotic philosophy, where Form 2 featured elegant, economical movements. Juyo incorporated wild swings and seemingly reckless attacks. Where Form 3 maintained defensive positioning, Form 7 abandoned defense almost entirely in favor of overwhelming offense. A Form 7 sequence might begin with a straightforward overhead strike, then suddenly shift into a spinning attack from an unexpected angle. The practitioner might feint toward their opponent's left, only to redirect at the last possible moment toward their right. They might drop their guard entirely to bait an attack, then explode into a devastating counter before their opponent could take advantage of the opening. The key was that none of these movements followed predictable patterns. A master of Form 2 could read their opponent's blade work and predict their next 3 moves with reasonable accuracy. Against a true Juyo practitioner, such predictions were impossible because even the practitioner themselves didn't know what they would do next until they did it. This unpredictability extended to every aspect of Form 7 combat. The speed of strikes varied randomly. Some attacks came with blinding speed, others with deliberate slowness that created psychological pressure. The force behind each blow was inconsistent. A Juyo practitioner might throw their entire strength into one strike, then follow it immediately with a gentle tap that served only to misdirect their opponent's attention. Footwork in Form 7 was equally chaotic. Where other forms emphasized stable stances and measured steps, Juyo incorporated sudden leaps, unexpected spins, and footwork patterns that seemed to defy tactical sense. A Form 7 practitioner might advance aggressively for several seconds, then suddenly retreat, then advance again from a completely different angle. All of this created an opponent who was essentially impossible to read or predict. Fighting a Form 7 master was like trying to block a storm. You could see each individual attack coming, but you could never anticipate the pattern because no pattern existed. The physical demands this placed on the practitioner were extraordinary. Maintaining such an intense, chaotic fighting style required exceptional stamina, flexibility, and force sensitivity. The practitioner had to be strong enough to vary their attacks from devastating power strikes to subtle redirections without any loss of control. They needed the endurance to maintain maximum aggression for extended periods, and they required the force awareness to let their instincts guide them without conscious thought. Many Jedi who attempted to learn Form 7 found themselves simply unable to meet these physical requirements. The form demanded too much, required capabilities that no amount of training could develop in someone who lacked the natural aptitude for it. But the physical challenges paled in comparison to the mental and spiritual ones. To fight using Juyo effectively, a Jedi had to enter what might be described as a state of controlled fury. They had to access their capacity for violence, for domination, for overwhelming their opponent through sheer aggressive will. They had to want to win with an intensity that went beyond simple determination. This mental state was fundamentally at odds with the Jedi ideal of serenity and emotional release. The Jedi Code taught that peace is gained through releasing passion, that strength comes from harmony rather than conflict, that inner calm is the foundation of all Jedi abilities. Form 7 required practitioners to temporarily abandon those teachings. In combat, a Juyo practitioner couldn't maintain serene detachment. They had to engage fully with their aggressive impulses, had to embrace the desire to defeat their enemy, had to channel emotions that in any other context would be considered steps toward the dark side. The challenge was doing all of this while maintaining their fundamental commitment to the light. A Jedi using Form 7 had to access their capacity for aggression without letting it become hatred. They had to embrace their desire to win without becoming attached to victory. They had to channel their fury without surrendering to it. This balance was extraordinarily difficult to maintain. In the intensity of real combat, with adrenaline flooding their system and their opponent trying to kill them, maintaining the distinction between righteous fury and dark side rage required almost superhuman self-awareness and discipline. Even for Jedi who successfully learned to fight, using Form 7 without falling to darkness, there were costs. Many reported that using the form left them feeling drained, not just physically but spiritually. The act of accessing those aggressive emotions, even while maintaining control over them, took a toll that meditation and rest couldn't entirely heal. Some Jedi who practiced Form 7 found that it became harder to access the deep serenity that other Force abilities required. They might still be able to meditate, still able to sense disturbances in the Force, but the profound peace that came naturally to other Jedi required more effort for them to achieve. Others reported that Form 7 changed how they experienced the Force itself, where once they had felt it as a gentle guiding presence, after training in Juyo they experienced it as something more intense, more demanding, more inherently connected to conflict and struggle. These effects weren't permanent for most practitioners, but they revealed how deeply Form 7 affected those who used it. This wasn't just another combat technique to be learned and applied when needed. It was a fundamental shift in how the practitioner related to the Force, to combat, and to their own emotional nature. The Jedi Council's fears about Form 7 weren't unfounded paranoia. History provided numerous examples of Jedi who studied Form 7 and subsequently fell to the dark side. While not every fall could be attributed directly to the form itself, the correlation was strong enough that the Council's restrictions seemed justified. The truth was that Form 7 asked its practitioners to dance on the edge of a cliff. Most Jedi who attempted it eventually lost their balance and fell. Those rare individuals who could walk that edge without falling represented the absolute pinnacle of Jedi discipline and self-knowledge. And yet, despite all the dangers, despite the restrictions and the warnings, and the documented cases of Jedi falling to darkness, after studying Form 7, the form persisted. It persisted because when executed properly by someone capable of handling its demands, Form 7 was devastatingly effective. Against dark side opponents who fought with complete emotional commitment to victory, Form 7 allowed Jedi to match that intensity without falling to darkness themselves. Against multiple opponents, the chaotic unpredictability of Juyo could create openings that more structured forms couldn't exploit. Against enemies who relied on reading their opponent's patterns, Form 7 made pattern recognition impossible. In the hands of a true master, someone who could channel aggression without hatred, passion without attachment, and fury without rage, Form 7 was perhaps the most potent lightsaber combat form ever developed. But such masters were extraordinarily rare, and even they understood that every time they ignited their lightsaber and entered the state of controlled chaos that Form 7 required, they were taking a risk that no amount of training could entirely eliminate. The line between light and dark is thin. Form 7 required its practitioners to walk that line with every strike, every parry, every moment of combat. one moment of lost control, one instant where fury became rage or aggression became hatred, and the fall could begin. This was the nature of Juyo. This was what made it simultaneously the most powerful and most dangerous of all the lightsaber forms. And this was why, throughout galactic history, those who mastered it would include both the greatest Jedi champions and some of the most terrible servants of the dark side. The question wasn't whether Form 7 was effective. The question was whether any being could wield such power without being consumed by it. For most of galactic history, the answer appeared to be no. The Sith didn't share the Jedi's concerns about Form 7. For them, the very qualities that made Juyo dangerous to Jedi made it perfect for servants of the dark side. Where Jedi feared the emotions that Form 7 required, Sith embraced them. Where Jedi worried about the line between controlled aggression and dark side corruption, Sith saw no line at all, only power to be seized. Form 7, in the hands of the Sith, became something even more terrifying than what the Jedi had created. The Sith approach to lightsaber combat had always differed fundamentally from the Jedi methodology, where Jedi viewed their lightsaber as a tool for defense, a last resort when peaceful solutions failed. Sith saw their blade as an instrument of domination and conquest. Where Jedi trained to end conflicts quickly and with minimal harm, Sith trained to utterly destroy their enemies and instill fear in anyone who might oppose them. These philosophical differences meant that when Sith encountered Form 7, they recognized it immediately as a style that aligned perfectly with their own values. The historical record becomes somewhat unclear when trying to determine exactly when Sith first began incorporating Form 7 techniques into their combat training. Some scholars believe that elements of what would become Juyo existed even among the ancient Sith lords, developing independently from the Jedi version of the form. The aggressive, unpredictable combat style that characterized Form 7 seemed almost instinctive for warriors who drew their power from passion and fury. Others argue that Sith learned Form 7 from fallen Jedi who had studied the form before turning to the dark side. Throughout history, numerous Jedi who experimented with Form 7 eventually fell to darkness, and many of them would have carried their knowledge of the form with them. These fallen Jedi could have taught Juyo to Sith apprentices, who then adapted it to better serve their dark purposes. The truth likely involves elements of both theories. Combat styles evolve naturally in response to practical needs, and the Sith certainly faced situations that demanded the kind of overwhelming aggression that Form 7 provided. At the same time, knowledge flowing from fallen Jedi would have accelerated and refined Sith understanding of the form's finer points. What we know with certainty is that by the time of the Old Republic, Sith mastery of Form 7 was well established and widely feared. For Sith practitioners, Form 7 offered advantages that went beyond mere combat effectiveness. The form's requirement that users tap into aggressive emotions wasn't a dangerous necessity to be carefully managed. For Sith, it was an opportunity to channel their dark side power directly into their combat style. A Sith using Form 7 could draw on their hatred without restraint. They could fuel their strikes with rage, their speed with fury, their endurance with an endless well of dark emotion. Where a Jedi practicing Form 7 had to carefully balance on the edge between controlled aggression and dark side corruption, a Sith could throw themselves fully into that darkness and emerge stronger for it. This meant that Sith Form 7 practitioners often achieved a level of ferocity that even the most skilled Jedi using the form couldn't match. They fought with a savage intensity that went beyond technique or training. They embodied chaos and violence in ways that made them almost unstoppable in direct combat. The unpredictability that was central to Form 7 became even more pronounced in Sith hands. Because Sith didn't need to maintain emotional control, they could allow their instincts full reign. Their attacks came from pure aggression, unfiltered by Jedi restraint. This made their movements even harder to anticipate, even more dangerous to defend against. But the Sith approach to Form 7 wasn't without its own costs. While Sith didn't risk falling to the dark side through practicing the form, since they were already immersed in darkness, they faced different dangers. The complete surrender to aggressive impulses that made Sith Form 7 so effective could also make practitioners reckless, causing them to take unnecessary risks or leave themselves vulnerable to calculated opponents. Additionally, the intense emotional state required for effective Form 7th combat drained even Sith practitioners. While they could draw on the dark side to sustain themselves longer than Jedi could, eventually, the toll of maintaining such fury would exhaust them. Extended battles using Form 7 often came down to which combatant could maintain their aggressive intensity longer. Among the most famous Sith practitioners of Form 7 was Darth Maul, the Zabrak apprentice of Darth Sidious, who would become the first Sith to reveal himself to the Jedi in nearly 1,000 years. Maul's story begins on the planet Dathomir, where the Night Sisters wielded dark side magic. From birth, Maul was immersed in darkness and violence. When Darth Sidious discovered him, he saw raw potential that could be forged into the perfect weapon against the Jedi. Sidious took the young Zabrak and subjected him to training that would have broken most beings. From the earliest age, Maul knew nothing but combat, pain, and the dark side of the Force. He learned to channel his suffering into strength, his hatred into power. And when it came time to train in lightsaber combat, Sidious ensured that Maul would master the most aggressive, most brutal forms available. Form 7 became central to Maul's combat style, though he combined it with elements from other forms to create something uniquely deadly. His natural Zabrak physiology gave him advantages in speed and endurance that he leveraged ruthlessly. His training under one of the most powerful Sith Lords in history provided him with technical knowledge that few could match. But what made Maul truly terrifying was how completely he embodied the ferocity that Form 7 demanded. Maul didn't just use Form 7, he lived it. Every moment of his existence was fury channeled toward a single purpose: destroying the Jedi and serving his master's grand design. When he fought, he brought that absolute commitment to bear with devastating effect. His duel with Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan Kenobi on Naboo demonstrated Form 7's effectiveness in Sith hands. From the moment he ignited his double-bladed lightsaber, Maul fought with relentless aggression that pushed both Jedi to their limits. His attacks came from unexpected angles, his movements mixing acrobatic flourishes with brutal strikes, his entire approach radiating barely controlled violence. Qui-Gon Jinn, a master of Form 4 Itaru, found himself matched by an opponent whose aggression exceeded anything most Jedi had faced in generations. The Jedi Master's acrobatic style, which relied on using the Force to enhance mobility and create offensive opportunities, met its match in Maul's Form 7 ferocity, combined with his own Force-enhanced athleticism. When the battle moved to the generator complex with its deadly energy shields, Maul's Form 7 training served him perfectly. The confined space and environmental hazards that might have constrained other fighters only seemed to fuel his aggression. He pressed his advantage ruthlessly, eventually driving his blade through Qui-Gon's torso, in a strike that demonstrated both his technical skill and his complete lack of mercy. The young Obi-Wan Kenobi, watching his master fall, responded with his own burst of aggressive fury. In that moment of rage and grief, Kenobi fought with an intensity that approached Form 7's ferocity, though his training was primarily in Itaru. The sudden shift in emotional intensity briefly overcame Maul's defenses, allowing Kenobi to bisect the Sith apprentice in what appeared to be a killing blow. Of course, Maul survived through sheer hatred and dark side power, but that battle on Naboo demonstrated several important truths about Form 7 in combat. First, it showed how devastating the form could be, when executed by someone with complete commitment to aggression. Maul's Form VII had brought down a Jedi Master who had decades of experience and formidable skill. Second, it revealed that Form VII's emphasis on emotion could work against its practitioners. Maul's confidence in his superiority, his belief that he had already won after killing Qui-Gon, created the opening that Kenobi exploited. The very fury that made Form VII so effective could also lead to the kind of arrogance that caused mistakes. Third, the duel showed that matching Form VII's aggression, even temporarily, could create opportunities. Kenobi's moment of rage-fueled intensity disrupted Maul's rhythm and allowed him to strike the decisive blow. This suggested that Form VII practitioners, while dominant against more defensive opponents, might struggle against those willing to meet their aggression head-on. After his resurrection and the years he spent rebuilding his sanity and his power, Maul continued to rely heavily on Form VII. His mechanical legs, while not as naturally agile as his original ones, still provided him with the mobility that Form VII required. His hatred, if anything, had only intensified during his years of suffering on Lotho Minor, giving him an even deeper well of dark emotion to draw upon in combat. Maul's later duels, including his encounters with Ahsoka Tano, Kanan Jarrus, and his final confrontation with Obi-Wan Kenobi on Tatooine, all showcased Form VII's enduring effectiveness in his hands. Even as he aged and accumulated injuries that might have slowed other warriors, Maul's absolute commitment to aggressive combat kept him dangerous. His final duel with Kenobi, decades after their first encounter on Naboo, showed how both warriors had evolved. Maul still relied on Form VII's ferocity, but age and experience had made him more calculating about when to unleash it. Kenobi, for his part, had spent those decades mastering Form III Soresu, the most defensive of all lightsaber forms. The duel lasted only seconds. Maul attempted the same overhead strike that had killed Qui-Gon decades earlier. Kenobi, who had spent 30 years reflecting on that moment, was ready for it. The defensive mastery of Form III, when executed perfectly, proved superior to Form VII's aggression in that single exchange. But Maul's legacy as a Form VII practitioner extended beyond his personal combat record. He represented what the Sith could achieve when they fully embraced the form's violent philosophy. His fights became legendary examples studied by both Jedi and Sith, who wanted to understand Form VII's applications at the highest level. While Darth Maul exemplified raw Form VII ferocity, other Sith Lords approached the form differently. Count Dooku, who became Darth Tyrannus, had spent decades as a Jedi Master before falling to the dark side. His primary form was Makashi, the elegant dueling style of Form II, which emphasized precision and economy of motion. Dooku's relationship with Form VII was more complicated than Maul's straightforward embrace of its aggression. As a Jedi, Dooku had undoubtedly been aware of Form VII and its dangers. His aristocratic personality and preference for refined technique made Juyo's chaotic nature somewhat antithetical to his preferred approach to combat. However, after turning to the dark side and becoming Darth Tyrannus, Dooku incorporated elements of Form VII into his repertoire. He recognized that while Makashi remained his primary form, certain situations demanded the overwhelming aggression that only Juyo could provide. Against multiple opponents or enemies whose defensive skills matched his offensive precision, Form VII's techniques could break through in ways that Makashi alone could not. Dooku's Form VII was markedly different from Maul's. Where Maul embodied raw ferocity, Dooku applied Form VII principles with the same calculated precision he brought to everything. His Juyo strikes retained an element of control and purpose that pure aggression lacked. He used Form VII as a tool rather than a way of life, switching to it when tactical considerations demanded overwhelming force, but returning to Makashi when finesse served him better. This hybrid approach had advantages and disadvantages. On one hand, It made Dooku more versatile than pure Form 7 specialists like Maul. He could adapt his style to different opponents and situations, choosing the most effective technique for each moment. On the other hand, his Juyo never achieved the same pure destructive intensity that characterized Sith, who committed to the form completely. Dooku's duels with Anakin Skywalker demonstrated this dynamic. During their first encounter on Geonosis, Dooku's Makashi precision overwhelmed the young Jedi's aggressive Form V attacks. But in their later encounter aboard the Invisible Hand above Coruscant, Anakin's evolution as a fighter and his willingness to tap into dark side aggression allowed him to match Dooku's versatility and ultimately overcome him. The Supreme Master of the Sith Order during the Clone Wars era, Darth Sidious also incorporated Form 7 into his combat style. Sidious's approach to lightsaber combat was uniquely dangerous because he had mastered all 7 forms and could flow between them seamlessly in the midst of battle. When Sidious chose to employ Form 7, the results were apocalyptic. His duel with the Jedi Masters who came to arrest him in his office demonstrated this perfectly. The moment he revealed himself and ignited his lightsaber, Sidious became a whirlwind of violence that cut down 3 Jedi Masters in seconds. The speed and ferocity of his assault, enhanced by decades of dark side mastery and his absolute confidence in his own superiority, embodied everything that made Form 7 terrifying. He didn't just fight the Jedi. He overwhelmed them so completely that they barely had time to mount a defense. Only Mace Windu, himself a master of a Form 7 variant, could match Sidious's aggressive intensity. Their duel became a clash of 2 fundamentally different approaches to the same combat philosophy. Sidious fought with pure dark side fury, drawing on hatred and the desire for domination. Windu fought with Vaapad, channeling that darkness back against Sidious while maintaining his own connection to the light. The debate about who truly won that duel, whether Sidious genuinely lost or deliberately allowed Windu to disarm him to complete Anakin's turn to the dark side, continues to this day. What's undeniable is that both combatants demonstrated Form 7 mastery at its absolute highest level. Beyond these famous examples, countless other Sith throughout history employed Form 7 with varying degrees of success. The ancient Sith Lords of the Old Republic era, warriors like Darth Bane who reformed the Sith Order according to the rule of 2, apprentices and assassins who served various Dark Lords across the millennia, all found value in Form 7's aggressive philosophy. For the Sith, Form 7 represented the perfect marriage of combat technique and dark side philosophy. It asked nothing that Sith weren't willing to give. It demanded no restraint that would weaken their strikes or limit their effectiveness. It allowed them to channel their hatred, their rage, their desire for power directly into devastating combat capability. The form's unpredictability aligned with Sith values of deception and manipulation. The physical and spiritual intensity it required matched the Sith commitment to gaining power through passion and strength. The toll it took on practitioners didn't concern them because Sith accepted suffering as the price of power. In Sith hands, Form 7 became more than a combat technique. It became an expression of their fundamental nature, a physical manifestation of their philosophical commitment to domination through strength. Every unpredictable strike was a rejection of Jedi restraint. Every moment of channeled fury was an affirmation that passion, not serenity, was the true path to power. And yet, even for the Sith, Form 7 was not without its complexities and contradictions. The complete surrender to aggression that made it so effective could also make Sith practitioners vulnerable to manipulation by calmer, more calculating opponents. The intense emotional state required for peak Form 7 performance could be difficult to maintain across extended campaigns or strategic operations that required patience and planning. Some Sith Lords recognized these limitations and chose to master Form 7 primarily for specific combat applications, while relying on other forms or non-combat skills for their broader strategic goals. Others committed to Form 7 so completely that it defined their entire approach to conflict, sometimes to their ultimate detriment. The legacy of Sith Form 7 practice is one of devastating effectiveness, tempered by the same fundamental challenges that affected Jedi practitioners. Power always comes with a price. For Jedi, that price was the risk of falling to darkness. For Sith, it was the danger of becoming so consumed by aggression that strategic thinking became impossible, or of burning so intensely that they exhausted themselves before achieving their goals. But in terms of pure combat effectiveness, in the hands of warriors like Darth Maul at his peak, or Darth Sidious during his rise to power, Form 7 proved that sometimes raw ferocity, when channeled through supreme skill and dark side power, could overcome almost any opposition. While Sith mastered Form 7 through complete surrender to dark side aggression, one Jedi discovered a way to harness the Form's power without falling to darkness. His name was Mace Windu, and his creation of Vaapad would represent the pinnacle of Form 7 evolution. Mace Windu's path to creating Vaapad began with his recognition of a fundamental truth about himself. Unlike many Jedi who could easily maintain serene detachment from their emotions, Windu felt the pull of aggression more strongly than most. He possessed a natural intensity, a warrior's spirit that sometimes chafed against the Jedi emphasis on calm serenity. Rather than see this as a weakness to be suppressed, Windu recognized it as something that could be channeled productively. But he also understood the dangers. He had seen Jedi fall to the dark side, had witnessed how easily the aggressive impulses necessary for Form 7 could transform into something darker. Windu wasn't content to simply master traditional Juyo, as it had been taught for generations. He wanted to evolve the form, to create a variant that could harness its devastating effectiveness, while building in safeguards against the dark side corruption that had claimed so many Form 7 practitioners. This ambition led him to collaborate with another Jedi who shared his interest in Form 7, Master Sora Bulk. Sora Bulk was a Weekay Jedi Master who had also recognized Form 7's potential and its dangers. Like Windu, he possessed the physical capabilities and force sensitivity necessary to excel at the form. Like Windu, he wanted to find a way to practice it safely. Together, Windu and Bulk studied traditional Juyo intensively. They practiced against each other, testing different approaches and techniques. They meditated on the philosophical implications of channeling aggression while maintaining commitment to the light. They examined historical records of Jedi who had fallen while studying Form 7, trying to identify the precise moments where control was lost and darkness took hold. Through this collaborative process, a new understanding began to emerge. Windu theorized that the key to safely practicing Form 7 wasn't in suppressing the aggressive emotions it required, but in redirecting them. Rather than trying to maintain calm while fighting aggressively, which created internal conflict that could tear a practitioner apart. What if the practitioner could channel their opponent's darkness? This insight led to the creation of Vaapad. The name Vaapad came from a creature native to Sarapin, a predator known for its incredible speed and aggression. The creature was said to have so many tentacles moving so fast that opponents couldn't track them all simultaneously. It was the perfect metaphor for what Windu's new form would become. Vaapad built upon Juyo's foundation, but added a revolutionary concept that Windu called the superconducting loop. In physics, a superconductor allows electrical current to flow without resistance. In Vaapad, Windu created a fighting style that allowed dark side energy to flow through the practitioner without corrupting them. Here's how it worked in practice. When facing an opponent who drew on the dark side, a Vaapad practitioner would open themselves to that darkness. They would sense their opponent's hatred, their aggression, their desire to kill. But instead of allowing these emotions to infect them or trying to block them out completely, the Vaapad user would channel that energy directly into their combat. The opponent's darkness would flow into the Vaapad practitioner, then immediately flow back out through their lightsaber strikes, redirected and amplified. The darker and more aggressive the opponent, the more powerful the Vaapad user's counterattacks became. It was like using the enemy's own strength against them, but at a level far more profound than simple physical redirection. This created what Windu described as a feedback loop. The opponent's darkness fueled the Vaapad user's aggression. That aggression, channeled back at the opponent, forced them to draw even deeper on the dark side to defend themselves. That increased darkness was then channeled back again, creating an ever-intensifying spiral of violence. The critical difference between this and simply falling to the dark side was that the Vaapad practitioner never claimed that darkness as their own. They remained a conduit rather than a source. The hatred and rage flowing through them belonged to their opponent. The Vaapad user merely redirected it. In theory, this meant that a Vaapad practitioner could match any level of dark side aggression without personal corruption. They could fight with the intensity of a Sith Lord because they were literally channeling a Sith Lord's darkness back at them. In practice, it was far more complicated and dangerous than the theory suggested. The challenge of Vaapad was that opening yourself to dark side energy, even temporarily, even with the intention of redirecting it, created enormous risk. The line between channeling an enemy's darkness and absorbing it into yourself was incredibly thin. A moment of weakness, a second of lost focus, and the darkness could take root. Additionally, Vaapad required the practitioner to maintain perfect self-knowledge. They had to be absolutely certain of who they were and what they stood for. Any doubt, any hidden darkness in their own heart, and the enemy's corruption could find purchase. This was why Mace Windu was one of the only Jedi who could safely practice Vaapad. His absolute commitment to the Jedi Order and the light side, combined with his unique ability to perceive shatter points in the Force, gave him tools that other Jedi lacked. Shatter points were a rare Force ability that allowed Windu to perceive the critical points where events or structures could be altered. In combat, this meant he could see the exact moment when an opponent's defense would break, when a battle's momentum would shift, when darkness threatened to take hold of his own spirit. This ability served as an early warning system. If Vaapad ever threatened to corrupt Windu himself, his shatterpoint perception would alert him before the damage became irreparable. He could sense the precise moment when he needed to pull back, to release the channeled darkness before it transformed into personal corruption. The combination of Vaapad's superconducting loop and Windu's shatterpoint perception created a combat style of devastating effectiveness. When Windu fought using Vaapad, he became something unique in the galaxy, a Jedi who could match Sith Lords in pure aggressive intensity without falling to the dark side. His duel with Darth Sidious demonstrated Vaapad at its absolute peak. Sidious, perhaps the most powerful Sith Lord in 1,000 years, drew on reserves of dark side power that would have overwhelmed almost any other Jedi. His Form 7 attacks came with speed and ferocity that had killed 3 Jedi Masters in seconds. But Windu's Vaapad transformed Sidious's strength into weakness. Every ounce of hatred that Sidious channeled into his attacks was redirected back at him through Windu's blade. The more aggressively Sidious fought, the more powerful Windu's counterattacks became. The feedback loop intensified until Sidious found himself not just matched, but potentially overmatched by a Jedi, using his own darkness against him. The philosophical implications of Vaapad were profound and troubling for the Jedi Order. On one hand, Windu had apparently solved the central problem of Form 7. He had found a way to harness its devastating effectiveness without the corruption that had claimed so many previous practitioners. On the other hand, Vaapad required its users to deliberately open themselves to dark side energy, even if they didn't claim that energy as their own, even if they remained conduits rather than sources. The act of channeling darkness seemed to violate fundamental Jedi principles about avoiding the dark side entirely. The Jedi Council debated whether Vaapad should be taught at all. Some masters argued that any technique requiring contact with the dark side was too dangerous regardless of theoretical safeguards. Others pointed to Windu's success as proof that with proper discipline and the right natural abilities, Vaapad could be practiced safely. The compromise was similar to what had been established for traditional Juyo: extreme restriction. Vaapad would be taught only to Jedi who Mace Windu personally believed could handle it. Even then, students would be monitored constantly for any signs that the form was corrupting them. In the end, only a handful of Jedi ever learned Vaapad, and of those, only Mace Windu himself achieved true mastery. The others either lacked his Shatterpoint ability, couldn't maintain the necessary self-knowledge, or simply didn't possess the natural intensity that made the form effective. Windu's student, Depa Billaba, came closest to matching his Vaapad mastery. She showed exceptional skill with the form, and seemed capable of maintaining the superconducting loop without corruption. But even she would eventually face challenges that tested whether any Jedi, besides Windu, could truly walk the razor's edge that Vaapad required. Vaapad represented the evolution of Form 7 from a dangerous necessity into something approaching an art form. It took the raw aggression of traditional Juyo and refined it, adding philosophical depth and technical innovation that made it more sophisticated, while potentially even more effective. But it also represented a controversial approach to the eternal tension between light and dark. Vaapad asked whether engaging directly with darkness, even while maintaining commitment to the light, was wisdom or folly. It questioned whether the ends of being able to defeat Sith Lords justified the means of channeling their corruption. These questions would never be fully answered. The fall of the Jedi Order and the rise of the Empire would cut short the experimentation with Vaapad. Mace Windu's death would seemingly end the line of transmission for the form, and the galaxy would be left to wonder whether his creation was a brilliant solution to an intractable problem or a dangerous compromise with darkness that simply hadn't existed long enough to reveal its true costs. What remained clear was that in Mace Windu's hands, Vaapad was devastatingly effective. It allowed one Jedi to stand against the darkness in a way few others could. Whether that made it a triumph of the light or a concerning flirtation with shadow would depend on who you asked. While Mace Windu exemplified the potential for a Jedi to master Form 7 safely, the story of Sora Bulk demonstrated the dangers that even the most careful practitioners faced. Sora Bulk's fall represents one of the greatest tragedies in the history of Form 7. Here was a Jedi Master who collaborated with Mace Windu himself to create a safer version of the galaxy's most dangerous combat form. He understood the risks intellectually. He had trained extensively to resist dark side corruption. He had every advantage that the Jedi Order could provide, and still, he fell. Bulk's background as a Weequay gave him certain natural advantages in learning Form 7. His species was known for producing tough, resilient warriors. He possessed the physical strength and endurance that the form demanded. His force sensitivity was strong enough to handle the intense connection required for effective Vaapad practice. During the years he worked with Mace Windu to develop Vaapad, Bulk showed every sign of being able to practice the form safely. He participated in the philosophical discussions about how to channel aggression without corruption. He helped test various techniques for maintaining the superconducting loop. He seemed to understand, as deeply as anyone besides Windu himself, how to walk the edge between light and dark. But understanding the risks intellectually and resisting them in practice proved to be different things. The Clone Wars created circumstances that tested every Jedi, but they were particularly challenging for Form 7 practitioners. The constant combat, the unending stream of battles against droids and dark side acolytes, the sheer exhaustion of fighting a galactic war created conditions where the aggressive emotions necessary for Form 7 were always close to the surface. For Sora Bulk, this environment became toxic. Every time he used Vaapad in battle, he channeled darkness. Every time he fought, he opened himself to enemy aggression and hatred. The superconducting loop that was supposed to protect him by immediately redirecting that darkness became a channel through which it could seep into his spirit. The process was gradual. There was no single moment where Bulk clearly chose darkness over light. Instead, each battle left tiny traces of corruption that accumulated over time. Each use of Vaapad wore away a little more of his resistance. The darkness he channeled began to feel comfortable, even necessary. Count Dooku recognized Bulk's vulnerability and exploited it masterfully. The former Jedi Master turned Sith Lord had decades of experience understanding how Jedi thought and what temptations might work on them. He approached Bulk not with obvious dark side rhetoric, but with reasonable-sounding arguments about the Clone Wars and the Jedi's role in it. Dooku suggested that the Jedi Council was leading the Order astray by fighting for a corrupt republic. He questioned whether the Jedi were truly serving the light by commanding clone armies and engaging in galactic warfare. He planted seeds of doubt about the very institutions and values that Bulk had devoted his life to serving. Combined with the cumulative effect of channeling darkness through Vaapad, these arguments found purchase in Bulk's mind. He began to see Dooku's points as valid. The Republic did seem corrupt. The Jedi were involved in warfare on an unprecedented scale. Perhaps a change was needed. By the time Bulk realized he had been compromised, it was too late. The darkness had taken root so deeply that returning to the light seemed impossible. Rather than confess his fall and seek help from the Jedi Council, Bulk chose to embrace his new path fully. He became one of Count Dooku's most valuable agents during the Clone Wars. His knowledge of Jedi tactics, his understanding of Form 7, and his skills as a combatant made him a formidable opponent for Jedi forces. He trained other fallen Jedi in combat techniques and helped coordinate attacks against Republic targets. The confrontation between Mace Windu and Sora Bulk was inevitable. When Windu learned of his former colleague's fall, he took responsibility for dealing with it personally. This was partly tactical. Windu was one of the few Jedi who could match Bulk's Form 7 mastery, but it was also personal. Windu felt responsible for Bulk's corruption, believing that their work together on Vaapad had created the vulnerability that Dooku exploited. Their duel was a clash of two fundamentally different relationships with the same combat form. Windu fought with Vaapad, channeling Bulk's darkness back at him while maintaining his own connection to the light. Bulk fought with pure Juyo, enhanced by dark side power, no longer trying to maintain any superconducting loop or resist corruption. In raw, aggressive intensity, they were nearly matched. Both had studied Form 7 for years. Both understood its techniques and philosophy at the deepest level. Both possessed the physical and force capabilities necessary for mastery. The difference was in what they drew upon for strength. Windu's power came from his absolute commitment to the light, and his ability to use Bulk's own darkness against him. Bulk's power came from the dark side itself, from hatred and rage that he no longer tried to resist. Windu ultimately prevailed, though accounts suggest the duel was closer than many expected. Bulk's fall had made him powerful in ways that his Jedi training alone never could. But Vaapad's superconducting loop proved more effective than pure dark side aggression in this case. The tragedy of Sora Bulk extended beyond his personal fall. His corruption seemed to validate all of the Jedi Council's worst fears about Form 7, and even about Vaapad, specifically. Here was a Jedi Master who had worked directly with Mace Windu to create a supposedly safer version of the form, and he had still fallen to darkness. Some Jedi Council members used Bulk's fall as evidence that Form 7 in any variant was simply too dangerous to teach. They argued that the form's requirement to channel aggression, whether the practitioner's own or their opponents, created an unacceptable corruption risk regardless of theoretical safeguards. Others countered that Bulk's fall proved only that Vaapad required exceptional discipline that most Jedi simply lacked. Mace Windu himself maintained that Bulk's corruption came not from Vaapad itself, but from the unique pressures of the Clone Wars and Dooku's manipulation. The debate was never fully resolved. The fall of the Jedi Order prevented any definitive conclusion about whether Sora Bulk's fate represented an inherent flaw in Form 7, or simply the tragedy of one Jedi who couldn't maintain the necessary balance. What Bulk's story undeniably demonstrated was that even the most careful preparation, even the most sophisticated understanding of Form 7's dangers, might not be enough to protect a practitioner from corruption. The form asked its users to engage with darkness in ways that created risk, no matter how many safeguards were implemented. For Mace Windu, Bulk's fall was a personal and professional failure that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He had believed that Vaapad could be taught safely to those with the right training and capabilities. Bulk's corruption forced him to confront the possibility that perhaps only his unique combination of abilities, his shatterpoint perception, his absolute self-knowledge, his specific relationship with the Force, made it possible to practice Form 7 without eventually falling. If that was true, then Vaapad as a teaching form had limited value. It could make Mace Windu himself more effective, but it couldn't be safely passed on to create a new generation of Form 7 masters. The knowledge would die with him. This realization added another layer of tragedy to the story of Form 7. The galaxy's most effective lightsaber combat form was also its most dangerous, and attempts to make it safer seemed only to create new paths to corruption. Beyond the most famous practitioners of Form 7, numerous other Jedi and Sith throughout galactic history attempted to master this most dangerous of combat forms. Their stories, while less well documented than those of Mace Windu or Darth Maul, reveal important truths about Form 7's nature and its effects on those who studied it. Among Jedi practitioners, the story of Depa Billaba stands out as particularly instructive. As Mace Windu's former Padawan, Billaba had unique advantages in learning Vaapad. She had trained under the form's creator, studied his techniques directly, and benefited from his guidance in navigating the psychological challenges that Vaapad presented. Billaba showed exceptional aptitude for the form. Her natural combat abilities combined with deep Force sensitivity made her one of the few Jedi who could execute Vaapad's techniques effectively. Windu trusted her enough to teach her the form in depth, something he granted to very few students. During the early Clone Wars, Billaba demonstrated her Vaapad mastery in numerous engagements. She led troops in battle with a ferocity that surprised many who had known her as a typically serene Jedi Council member. Her ability to channel enemy darkness while maintaining her own connection to the light seemed to prove that Vaapad could be safely taught, beyond just Mace Windu himself. But the Clone Wars tested every Jedi in ways that peacetime training could never prepare them for. Billaba was assigned to the planet Harun Kal, Mace Windu's homeworld, where brutal guerrilla warfare had consumed the population. The constant combat, the moral ambiguity of the conflict, and the sheer darkness present in that theater of war created conditions that challenged even her Vaapad discipline. Over time, Billaba began to struggle with distinguishing between enemy darkness that she was channeling and her own emotional responses to the horrors she witnessed. The superconducting loop that should have protected her started to break down. The darkness she encountered in battle began to accumulate rather than flowing cleanly through her. She didn't fall completely to the dark side in the way Sora Bulk did. Instead, she experienced what might be described as a partial corruption. where elements of darkness influenced her decisions and actions without consuming her entirely. She became more ruthless in combat, more willing to accept collateral damage, more focused on victory at any cost. Mace Windu eventually intervened, recognizing that his former apprentice was losing her balance. Through intensive meditation and counseling, Bilaba managed to pull back from the edge of full corruption. She survived the experience, but the psychological scars remained. Her case demonstrated that even successful Vaapad practitioners faced ongoing risks every time they engaged with the form. Bilaba would eventually take her own Padawan, Kanan Jarrus, though she chose not to teach him Vaapad. The form's toll on her, even though she had resisted complete corruption, convinced her that it was too dangerous to pass on. This decision may have saved Jarrus from the temptations that plagued so many Form 7 students. Another Jedi who had significant exposure to Form 7 concepts, though not formal training in Vaapad, was Quinlan Vos. The Maverick Jedi was known for his unconventional methods and his willingness to work in morally gray areas that more traditional Jedi avoided. Vos's combat style incorporated elements from multiple forms, but he showed a particular affinity for the aggressive, unpredictable techniques that characterize Form 7. His ability to read psychometric impressions from objects and people gave him insights that enhanced his combat effectiveness in ways similar to how Mace Windu's Shatterpoint perception augmented his Vaapad. During the Clone Wars, Vos was assigned deep cover missions that required him to pose as a criminal, and even to work with Sith apprentices. These assignments exposed him to dark side influence in ways that tested his commitment to the light. His natural inclination toward Form 7 style aggression in combat made him particularly vulnerable to corruption in these circumstances. Vos did temporarily fall to the dark side during his mission to assassinate Count Dooku, demonstrating how exposure to darkness combined with aggressive combat tendencies could overcome even experienced Jedi. Like Depa Billaba, he eventually found his way back to the light, but the experience left its mark. His case illustrated an important point about Form 7. Even Jedi who didn't formally study the form could be drawn toward its principles, and that attraction often correlated with vulnerability to dark side corruption. The aggressive combat philosophy that made Form 7 effective was precisely what made it dangerous. Anakin Skywalker's relationship with Form 7 was complicated and ultimately tragic. As Obi-Wan Kenobi's apprentice, Anakin's primary training was in Form Phi Gem. So, the power-focused variant that emphasized strong counterattacks. This form aligned well with his natural strength and aggressive personality. However, Anakin showed tendencies that suggested he might have excelled at Form 7 if he had received formal training in it. His willingness to tap into aggressive emotions for combat effectiveness, his unpredictable fighting style when emotionally invested in a battle, and his natural intensity all resembled Form 7 characteristics. Some Jedi Council members worried about this similarity. They saw how easily Anakin's passion could tip into anger, how his desire to protect those he cared about could become possessive attachment. The qualities that might have made him an effective Form 7 practitioner were the same qualities that made him vulnerable to falling. Mace Windu, despite being the master of Vaapad, never offered to train Anakin in the form. This decision likely stemmed from recognition that Anakin lacked the absolute self-knowledge and emotional discipline that Vaapad required. Where Windu channeled darkness while remaining centered in his own identity, Anakin's identity itself was uncertain, torn between different loyalties and desires. When Anakin finally fell and became Darth Vader, his combat style did incorporate more Form 7 elements. The rage and hatred that fueled him as a Sith Lord found natural expression in Kuyo's aggressive philosophy. However, his physical limitations after his injuries on Mustafar prevented him from executing the form with the same acrobatic intensity that practitioners like Darth Maul achieved. Vader's Form 7 was heavy, brutal, and overwhelming, rather than quick and unpredictable. He used the form's philosophical approach to channeling emotion while adapting its physical techniques to work with his mechanical limbs and diminished mobility. The result was effective, but represented a different interpretation of Form 7 than what either Jedi or most Sith had developed. Throughout the Old Republic era, numerous Jedi undoubtedly studied Form 7 to various degrees. Most would have learned only the basics before their instructors or the Council determined they lacked the necessary discipline to continue safely. These partial students couldn't execute Form 7 effectively in combat, but carried with them some understanding of its principles. This widespread but superficial knowledge of Form 7 may have contributed to some Jedi falls during periods of crisis. When faced with overwhelming dark side opposition or extreme stress, Jedi with incomplete Form 7 training might have tried to apply what they knew, accessing aggressive emotions without the full philosophical framework or technical skill to do so safely. The few Jedi who achieved significant proficiency with traditional Juyo beyond Mace Windu and his students remain largely unknown to history. The Jedi Order's policy of restricting Form 7 instruction meant that records of who studied it were often kept confidential. Additionally, the stigma associated with the form meant that successful practitioners might not have advertised their expertise. What we can infer is that over thousands of years and countless generations of Jedi, probably hundreds attempted serious Form 7 study. Of these, perhaps dozens achieved meaningful proficiency, and of those, only a handful managed to practice the form for extended periods without falling to darkness or suffering psychological effects that limited their effectiveness as Jedi. This ratio, if accurate, explains why the Jedi Council maintained such strict restrictions on Form 7 instruction despite recognizing its combat effectiveness. The cost in Lost Jedi was simply too high for the military advantage gained. On the Sith side, Form 7 practitioners were likely more numerous, but equally difficult to document comprehensively. The Sith tradition emphasized individual achievement and often involved masters hiding knowledge from apprentices to maintain power advantages. This made systematic record-keeping about who learned what forms sporadic at best. Ancient Sith lords from the Old Republic era almost certainly included Form 7 specialists, given how well the form's philosophy aligned with Sith values. Warriors like Exar Kun, Ulic Qel-Droma, and Darth Malak showed combat styles that incorporated elements recognizable as Form 7 principles, though exact details of their training are lost to history. During the Rule of Two era, which began with Darth Bane around 1,000 years before the Clone Wars, Form 7 knowledge would have passed from master to apprentice in an unbroken chain. Each generation of Sith would have studied all 7 forms, with individual practitioners gravitating toward those that best suited their abilities and temperament. Some Sith lords would have specialized in Form 7, finding it the perfect expression of their dark side power. Others would have learned it as one tool among many, using it when tactical situations demanded overwhelming aggression, but relying on other forms in different circumstances. The diversity of Sith approaches to Form 7 mirrors the diversity seen among Jedi practitioners, suggesting that individual personality and natural aptitude played as large a role as philosophical alignment in determining who would master the form. The legacy of Form 7 extends far beyond the individual practitioners who studied it. As the most controversial and philosophically complex of the 7 lightsaber forms, Juyo and its Vaapad variant raised fundamental questions about the Jedi Order's approach to combat, emotion, and the dark side. Form 7 forced the Jedi to confront uncomfortable truths about the nature of conflict. The form's effectiveness demonstrated that sometimes peace required the capacity for overwhelming violence. Sometimes defending the light meant engaging directly with darkness. Sometimes the serene detachment that characterized Jedi philosophy wasn't enough to overcome enemies who fought with complete emotional commitment. These realizations challenged core Jedi beliefs about how to engage with conflict. If Form 7 was necessary for defeating certain enemies, did that mean the traditional Jedi emphasis on emotional control and defensive fighting was insufficient? If channeling aggression and engaging with darkness were sometimes required, what did that say about the bright line the Jedi tried to maintain between light and dark? The Jedi never fully resolved these questions. Different council members and different generations of masters held varying views about what Form 7 meant for Jedi philosophy. Some saw it as proof that the Jedi needed to be more flexible in their thinking, more willing to embrace effective tools, even if they carried risks. Others viewed it as a dangerous temptation that the Order should resist regardless of short-term tactical advantages. Mace Windu's creation of Vaapad represented an attempt to thread this needle, to find a way to harness Form 7's power while remaining true to Jedi principles. The superconducting loop concept, channeling enemy darkness rather than drawing on personal aggression, offered a theoretical framework for using the form without corruption. But Vaapad's mixed results, the falls of Sora Bulk and the struggles of Depa Billaba, suggested that even refined versions of Form 7 carried unacceptable risks for most practitioners. The question of whether Vaapad represented a solution to Form 7's dangers or merely a more sophisticated path to the same corruption remained debatable. For the Sith, Form 7's legacy was more straightforward. The form proved that embracing emotion and aggression in combat could be devastatingly effective. It validated core Sith philosophical principles about the relationship between passion and power. Sith practitioners who mastered Form 7 became living arguments against the Jedi approach to emotional control. At the same time, Form 7's demands meant that even Sith faced challenges in mastering it. The complete surrender to aggression that the form required could make practitioners reckless or predictable in their bloodlust. The intense physical and mental toll limited how long even powerful Sith could maintain peak Form 7 performance. The form's unpredictability, while useful against opponents, could also make it difficult for Sith to coordinate with allies or execute complex strategic plans that required predictable behavior. A Sith Lord completely consumed by Form 7 fury might win individual battles but struggle with the patience and calculation needed for long-term schemes. These limitations explain why, even among the Sith, Form 7 was one approach among several, rather than a universal solution. Sith who combined Form 7 with other forms, using Juyo strategically rather than relying on it exclusively, often proved more successful than pure specialists. The broader impact of Form 7 on galactic history is difficult to quantify, but undeniably significant. In major conflicts between Jedi and Sith, Form 7 practitioners on both sides often played decisive roles. Their ability to match intensity with intensity, to meet aggression with equal or greater force, made them crucial in battles where more balanced or defensive approaches fell short. During the Clone Wars, Mace Windu's Vaapad made him one of the most effective Jedi combatants against Sith and Darkside users. His ability to stand against Darth Sidious himself, even briefly, demonstrated what Form 7 mastery could accomplish. Without Vaapad, the course of crucial battles might have been very different. Similarly, Darth Maul's Form 7 expertise made him a terrifying opponent who could face multiple Jedi simultaneously. His ferocity allowed him to eliminate Qui-Gon Jinn, potentially altering the course of Anakin Skywalker's training and development. The ripple effects of that single Form 7-enabled victory extend throughout galactic history. But Form 7's greatest impact may have been psychological and philosophical, rather than strictly military. The form's existence forced both Jedi and Sith to grapple with fundamental questions about the relationship between emotion and power, between defensive philosophy and offensive capability, between purity of method and effectiveness of results. For the Jedi Order, Form 7 represented a constant challenge to their philosophy of emotional detachment and defensive combat focus. The fact that the form existed and was sometimes necessary created ongoing tension between ideological purity and practical effectiveness. This tension influenced how the Jedi approached training, how they thought about combat, and how they understood their role as peacekeepers. The debates about Form 7 instruction mirrored larger debates within the Order about how flexible Jedi could be in their methods while remaining true to their principles. These debates never reached final resolution, which may itself be significant. Some questions don't have clean answers, and Form 7 forced the Jedi to live with that ambiguity. The psychological toll that Form 7 took on practitioners represents another crucial aspect of its legacy. Even Jedi and Sith who successfully mastered the form and used it effectively often paid a price. The constant engagement with aggression, the repeated channeling of dark emotions, the ongoing balancing act between power and corruption, all of this created stress that accumulated over time. Mace Windu himself, despite his extraordinary discipline and his success in creating Vaapad, showed signs of this toll. Those who knew him described how using Vaapad left him emotionally drained, requiring extended meditation to fully recover his equilibrium. The form's effectiveness came at a personal cost that even its greatest master couldn't entirely avoid. For lesser practitioners, the costs were often higher. Jedi who studied Form 7 reported nightmares, difficulty meditating, and a persistent sense of walking on the edge of an abyss. Even those who never fell to darkness described feeling changed by the form, as though something in them had shifted in ways they couldn't fully articulate or reverse. This psychological dimension of Form 7 helps explain why so many Jedi who studied it eventually either fell to the dark side or abandoned the form entirely. The mental and spiritual demands simply proved unsustainable for most individuals over extended periods. As we consider the complete history of Form 7, certain themes emerge clearly. First, effectiveness and danger are inseparable in this form. The very qualities that make it devastatingly powerful in combat are precisely what make it perilous to practice. Any attempt to eliminate the danger also reduces the effectiveness. Second, individual variation matters enormously. Form 7 was never a one-size-fits-all technique. What worked for Mace Windu failed for Sora Bulk. What suited Darth Maul's approach differed from Count Dooku's application. The form required not just skill, but a specific alignment between the practitioner's natural abilities, psychological makeup, and philosophical commitments. Third, context shapes outcomes. Form 7. Practitioners face different challenges in different eras and situations. The intense combat of the Clone Wars created pressures that peacetime practice didn't. Fighting dark side opponents activated the form's capabilities in ways that training against other Jedi couldn't replicate. The form's effects on practitioners varied based on these contextual factors. Finally, questions about Form 7 remain fundamentally unresolved. Was Vaapad a solution to the form's inherent dangers, or just a more sophisticated path to the same risks? Could Form 7 be taught safely to those besides Mace Windu? Did the form's effectiveness justify its costs? Would a Jedi Order that more widely embraced Form 7 have been more effective against the Sith, or would it have simply produced more fallen Jedi? We can't answer these questions definitively because the fall of the Jedi Order cut short the experimentation. Mace Windu died before he could train a new generation of Vaapad practitioners. The systematic knowledge that the Jedi had accumulated about Form 7 over millennia was largely lost. The Sith tradition that had maintained Form 7 expertise was disrupted by the Empire's rise and the eventual extinction of the Sith. What remains is a legacy of extraordinary combat effectiveness, coupled with extraordinary danger, of philosophical complexity that defied easy resolution, and of individual practitioners whose achievements and failures with the form became legendary examples, studied by those who came after. Form 7 stands as perhaps the clearest example of the eternal tension in the Force between power and corruption, between effectiveness and safety, between embracing emotion and maintaining control. The form offered no easy answers to these tensions. Instead, it demanded that each practitioner find their own balance, walk their own path along the razor's edge between light and dark. Some succeeded spectacularly, becoming warriors whose skill and discipline allowed them to harness darkness itself in service of the light. Others failed tragically, falling to the very corruption they sought to resist. And most who attempted the form fell somewhere between these extremes, learning something from it, but never achieving true mastery, gaining some combat effectiveness, but at a cost that limited how much they could safely employ what they had learned. In the end, Form 7's greatest lesson may be about the nature of power itself. Power in any form comes with responsibility and risk. The greater the power, the greater both become. Form 7 offered tremendous power, but it demanded tremendous responsibility and carried tremendous risk in return. Those who sought to master it had to understand this bargain completely and accept it willingly. They had to be prepared to walk the edge between light and dark with every strike of their blade. They had to maintain absolute clarity about who they were and what they stood for, even while channeling emotions and energies that could overwhelm that clarity in an instant. And they had to accept that even with perfect discipline and complete commitment, they might still fail. They might still fall. The form offered no guarantees, only the opportunity to test themselves against one of the most demanding challenges a Force user could face. Form 7. Juyo and its variant Vaapad represent the pinnacle of lightsaber combat evolution, the furthest development of martial technique in service of the Force. The form pushed practitioners to their absolute limits and beyond, asking them to be simultaneously aggressive and controlled, emotional and disciplined, wild and precise. Those who mastered it achieved something remarkable. Those who fell to it served as warnings about the costs of seeking power without sufficient wisdom. And those who attempted it and stepped back, recognizing it wasn't for them, showed wisdom of a different kind. The legacy of Form 7 endures not just in combat techniques or historical records, but in the questions it raises about how we engage with our own capacity for violence, how we harness dangerous tools for good purposes, and how we walk the line between effectiveness and corruption in all aspects of life. These questions remain relevant whether one is a Jedi facing a Sith Lord, a Sith seeking dominion, or simply someone trying to navigate the complex moral landscape of existence in a galaxy where light and darkness are always in tension. Form 7 taught that sometimes we must engage directly with darkness to overcome it. But it also taught that such engagement carries costs and risks that can never be entirely eliminated. The balance between these truths, the wisdom to know when the risks are worth taking and when they're not, represents a challenge that transcends lightsaber combat and touches on the fundamental nature of moral choice in an imperfect universe. If you found this deep dive into Form 7 Juyo and Vaapad enlightening, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We explore the darker corners of Star Wars lore, uncovering the histories, philosophies, and techniques that shape the galaxy far, far away. There's always more to discover in the shadows where the Sith dwelt, and the lessons they left behind for those brave enough or foolish enough to study them. May the Force be with you, always, whether you walk in light or dance on the edge of darkness.